Okay. All right. Thank you guys all so much for coming. Sorry about the confusion with the Google Meet and everything. Today we will be hearing from Joey Liu, the Food Access Coordinator of Seattle Farmers Markets, and also Brian Sindel, the Director of Jewish Family Services. And they're going to talk a little bit about their farmers market perspective on gleaning and share their experience with you. First, I wanted to give a couple of quick announcements before we get started. You've probably seen word go out about the Big Blueberry Glean in collaboration with Christ the King Food Share and Farm happening this weekend on the 20th in Bellingham with hundreds of pounds of blueberries to harvest for hunger relief. And it's an opportunity to share that abundance of produce that is really abundant within the state. So bring your trucks, bring your bins, bring your gear. We're going to meet at Christ the King Farm, do a quick carpool to the site, though there is a place you can bring your organization's vehicle if you have a Discover Pass, and I'm going to paste some details into the chat here in a sec. The first part of the glean will be harvesting for Christ the King. The other part, you'll be able to harvest those juicy berries and bring them back to your organization. So if you haven't already, please sign up. And I'm going to paste those links into the chat here. And there's that. Okay. Also wanted to let you know our next meeting will be August 8th at 10 a.m. with featuring Rachel Bishop of UV Men to focus on their new emergency response protocol. So Rachel's going to be sharing their process for gleaner safety in the field, including topics like safety scenarios and first aid. This is a really important topic that never seems to get enough attention. So you may have gotten calendar invites already, but just in case, I will paste also that link in the chat. Um, Technical difficulties today. Here we go. All right. And the very last thing, the August meeting will also announce those who are selected for the advisory committee. So you'll be seeing a selection form go out by the end of this week or early next, which has kind of a short bio for each person and like a checkbox where you can select any or all of the candidates that you'd like to. We really value your feedback on this one, so please have a look. So today we are testing a kind of new 45-minute format of meetings where we'll feature a speaker on a Gleaner related topic about 20 or 30 minutes, but then open up the floor for discussion between all of you so you can ask your questions and talk about your experiences. So we hope that this will be a meeting format that encourages learning from each other, spurs those excellent discussions we tend to have together. So with that, I will hand it off to Joey and Brian to introduce themselves and their work.
Alrighty, hello everyone. My name is Joey and I am the Food Access Coordinator with the Neighborhood Farmers Markets. So coordinating gleaning for our markets and making sure our SNAP programs go well and all the fun stuff that I get to do is part of my role. And Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian. I'm the food bank manager at Jewish Family Service. We're located in Capitol Hill in Seattle. We are part of a larger social service agency, so the food bank is just one of our programs. But we have an in-person food bank where folks can shop. We have a home delivery program. We have some connections with early learning centers, and we're recently piloting some online ordering. So that's just a touch on some of the services we do. And in the summer, we get to do fun stuff like gleaning fresh produce, which we'll talk about today.
Yeah, so it's good to see you all. And I'm going to share my screen. We all good? Everybody see this? Amazing. I am going to now try to make sure. Okay, dokes. I do want to first acknowledge that this is I tried to make it as broad and applicable as possible because I know every market is so different. Even within our 7.5 markets, each gleaning partner operates a little bit differently. They have their own structure. So we're going to try to go over the general gist of it. In terms of getting started, markets are run by so many different organizations. We have 5 in Seattle alone, and some markets are run by nonprofits, some are run by the city. So definitely just, if you have a market close to you, figuring out who runs it and then getting in touch with the manager is a great way to just see if they have a gleaning program already or see if they're open to having a gleaning program. And I think one of the biggest just logistical challenges for us and for some of our gleaning partners is that markets normally have a set day and time each week, and almost always they exist out of normal operating business hours. So our markets are either 10 to 2 or 9 to 2 or 10 to 11 to 3 on the weekends, or 3 to 7 on a weekday. And that can make it pretty tough for our staff or volunteers on the Gleaning org side to make sure someone has a key to be able to open up their refrigeration or their building so you can store the produce. So that's just something to also consider when you're thinking about gleaning at a farmer's market, because that is just something that will be a barrier and is pretty hard to work around, but is possible to work around, especially if you have any super engaged volunteers who do work in normal business hours and want a way to volunteer outside of normal business hours. Generally, I would suggest reaching out about 2 months in advance and in advance of when the market opens. So if a market opens in May, I would reach out sometime in March or April if they open in June. And that's because some markets will have an established gleaning partner and they've had that partner for years and years and years, and they don't really have that space for a new gleaning partner. But also 2 months in advance is plenty of time to be like, oh, hey, our gleaning partner from last year ended up, not being able to do it again this year because they moved to a new location and the market was just out of their route. And we now had a gap, and one of our food banks reached out and they were like, we were looking for gleaning opportunities. I'm like, perfect timing. You reached out before I started reaching out. So about 2 months in advance is a sweet spot. And you can kind of determine what your capacity is and kind of what the market capacity is for a weekly or a bi-weekly schedule. A lot of our seasonal markets, because they're really open from like May or June to September, October, it's a bit of a shorter season. So we try to schedule those for one gleaner who can come consistently every week. But we do know our Capitol Hill one, it's so centrally located and it's a year-round market, but it's also just a bigger market. That's one of our markets that alternates gleaners every week on their Sunday and Tuesday markets. So once you've determined if the market, the day and time works for you, works for your organization, you know who to contact and you've reached out and they have space for gleaning, I would definitely recommend, I would definitely recommend having a gleaning agreement in place between the two organizations. And that's just so that you both kind of have set expectations and guidelines for how you will go about gleaning and how you'll interact in that space together. It also helps to kind of establish dates ahead of time. If you know the day before Labor Day, you're not going to be gleaning because your food bank is going to be open, that's a really good thing to tell the market so that they know, to let their farmers know that there's not going to be any gleaning happening that day. And generally, being able to glean week over week is super preferred on our end, so it's less to coordinate for the market and also more consistent food for the food bank or the gleaning organization. I have an example of a gleaning agreement sent to Sarah, who will share it out at the end of the meeting or in the email, and it's just kind of the guidelines that we have for gleaning. How do I move to page 2? Okay, and then once you have that gleaning agreement signed and that kind of agreement in place, on your end, I think we really suggest having like a volunteer orientation or making sure you have staff or someone who will be able to do the gleaning. You don't need to do a full orientation. You could definitely just arrive a little bit early your first week and kind of figure out how the flow of the market's going, what is happening. I would, ahead of starting to glean, ask the manager or ask our market organization for a map of the layout or a list of the vendors, and that really helps you being able to track how many boxes you've dropped off to people as you're going about it, or how many boxes you've gotten back. I would also call ahead and just check kind of what the parking situation is. A lot of our markets, they're so different. Some of them have parking, which is super great for gleaners. They just pull into the parking spot and they have that spot, and some of them are on a really busy street. So they're off-site about a block down when they first start gleaning and they drop all the boxes off. And then when we're able to close the market, then they could pull on-site into a very specific spot that won't be in the way of all of the vendors trying to pack up and head home. So figuring that parking situation ahead of time could be really helpful for you and for the market. And then I would definitely grab the manager's phone number. Sometimes things come up, someone has COVID, someone got sick, there's a car accident, or a volunteer can't make it anymore. And sending to me email is amazing, it's great. But if they're at a market, they're not going to be checking their emails, but they might check their phone for a text, for a call. And that's just really preferred for communication if you're going to be late or anything that comes up. So these are things that you should do probably before you start gleaning, or at the very least week 1 of when you start. And then this is for our general guidelines of when you get to the market, how you go about gleaning. And we definitely suggest arriving about 15 to 30 minutes before closing. If it's a bigger market, maybe 30 or 45. If it's a smaller market, about 15 to 30. And this is so you could check in with the market manager, let them know that, hey, I'm with the food bank, or I'm with the gleaning org, and I'm here to glean. And sometimes we'll have a map or a list printed out that day for you, because vendors change and it varies week by week. And sometimes we have alternating vendors and whatnot. And it helps if you have like an apron or a hat or a t-shirt or something to identify yourself as someone from the food bank or the gleaning org, especially those first couple weeks that you're getting started before the vendors or the salespeople really recognize you and recognize your face, recognize where you're from. Because sometimes it's nice to see like, oh, t-shirt with a food bank on it. Sure, I have a bunch of carrots to donate. One thing that some of our vendors might request are receipts, and that's donation receipts for tax purposes. So just have a couple with you on hand. If they're requested, hand them out. I think Brian does it differently with a thank you card and kind of tallying, so I'll let Brian talk about that in a bit. But when you go about making your first round through the market, you're going to want to hand out your crates or your boxes. And we definitely suggest tracking how many boxes you leave with each vendor. If we leave 3 boxes with Canales produce, and then we leave 2 boxes with Tonamaker, we just want to make sure to be able to get all 5 boxes that we put out back. We have sometimes where at the end of the market, a manager's just like, I have a random box of lettuce just like sitting by my foot because everybody had left and it got lost in the mix. So tracking the number of boxes you distribute is helpful, so you don't lose any boxes and don't miss any produce, and then we don't have any random stray heads of lettuce rolling around. What we do ask of our gleaning orgs, we try to keep it fairly simple in terms of how they record what they're gleaning from us. We ask them to just provide us a monthly or yearly report of the total number of produce that they've gleaned. Produce, it could also be bread or meat, total number of whatever items it is that they glean from our market. I know some gleaning organizations like to do it much more detailed, where they'll track how many pounds donated from each specific vendor, which is really great for the vendors' purposes of tax donations. We don't require it, but some organizations might, so it would just be helpful to have that list to track if your organization is asking for that. But this total number of pounds is going to be really important for us and really important for whoever's doing the market or the vendors that are donating. And then this last piece is just super important. Just let us know if you can no longer make it that day or that week, ideally as in advance as possible, but things happen, accidents, sickness, whatever. If you can call, text, email, just let us know, so then we can also let the farmers know, because sometimes we have vendors who will purposely set aside a handful of things for the gleaners, and then when they come realize that in the market they're not there, they could have sold that, or now they have to bring it back. So a lot of our farmers look forward to seeing gleaners, and it's just nice to give them a heads up if we won't have it coming in that day. This is my last slide, and then I'll toss it over to Brian. But farmers are actually, they really look forward to seeing our gleaners. They get pretty disappointed when gleaners don't show. I think for them, it's just nice at the end of the day, partly when they have some produce that, you know, they have 1 box of stuff and it's not worth it for them to drive back to their farm to drop off a single box of beets. Well, they could just donate it, and sometimes they'll purposely donate or set aside a bit to donate. So it is disappointing when our gleaners don't show up. We do a buy some, share some program at some of our markets, and this is something that you could also talk to your market about doing if they're open to it. But we basically have a crate at our manager's tent, and we have a little sign that says buy some, share some, and we'll put the logo of whoever's gleaning at that market, and shoppers, when they're swinging by, if they're swinging by, will buy an extra box of strawberries or an extra carton of eggs. We have one woman at Capitol Hill, super consistent. Every week she'll buy a carton or 2 cartons of eggs to donate to the food bank or whoever is gleaning at the end of that day. And that's just a nice way to kind of get some shoppers aware that you are here. We have food banks gleaning, and a nice way to get them engaged. And then the biggest thing I think is consistency year over year. It does go a long way in terms of building that relationship with the market, building that relationship with our vendors, and also just gleaning a little bit more. The first few years, whenever we have new gleaners, it's always a little bit like, who are you? What are you doing? What is this? But if you're in year 3 or year 5 or year 15, our vendors are going to know to expect you. Our vendors are going to be like, all right, where are they? And consistency just goes a long way. Other challenges that are just hard, our markets are at odd hours, and normally you'll be gleaning at the end of the market, which is sometimes at like 7 p.m. And no one really wants to be gleaning 7 p.m. on a Friday, and that is the biggest challenge I've had this year. But also gleaning happens as the vendors are packing up, and the market can be fairly chaotic depending on how the market is set up. Staff are going to be opening the streets, vendors are going to be driving out, there's going to be large trucks, and you have like 60 people who may or may not be able to drive very well, all like in the same space. So that's a challenge with gleaning, but normally you'll be able to like work things out and kind of find your flow after the first couple of weeks. Great, talked a lot. I think that's it for me for now. Brian?
Thanks, Joey. So in preparing this slide with Joey, I learned that JFS has been gleaning for the past 15 years, which was a big surprise for me. And I bring that up in the context of also saying we're definitely not like experts in gleaning. This is just an example of how the program works for us. And honestly, because it's been 15 years, I think we're on autopilot. So there's a lot of details that I might leave out for that reason. So please feel free to contact me if you have questions about things that I just skipped completely over that are very important. So our gleaning program, we just glean in the summer. We just do it seasonally, June through September, 2 times a month. Part of the reason for that is just based on the fact that we glean from the Capitol Hill Farmers Market, which we're really fortunate is just a mile from our food bank. It's really close. It's our neighborhood food farmers market. But we do need a staff person to attend, and Sundays are not part of our regular working hours. So it's really challenging for us with a small team to be able to have staff available on the weekends. And so we really have to know that the amount of produce that we're getting is going to be worth the staff time. And we just find that in the off season, not during the prime growing season, that the amount of produce that we're bringing back really isn't going to be worth it for us. So this is the model, again, that works for us at JFS, is really going in those prime summer months where we really do bring back a lot of produce. It's amazing how much stuff we can get. So yeah, we're 2 times a month, June through September, Sundays in the afternoons. We always send 1 staff person down, and then we meet volunteers. We have found the sweet spot of volunteers has been about 2 to 3 people, and that's for a pretty large market. We have had larger groups come before. Coordinating just gets really challenging. The Capitol Hill Market, if you're familiar, it's in a very dense urban area. Parking is just not a thing. And the larger group you have, everybody is arriving at different times. People can't find parking, they're lost. And we just find that we lose so much time when we try to coordinate with a big group. What's really been key for us is having volunteers who live in the neighborhood and can just walk to the market. So every market can be very different, but for us at the Capitol Hill Market, that's what we've found the most success with. So what we'll do is we have 1 staff person drive down in our food bank van. In the van, we always bring, you can see two examples, either these large push carts, or we'll bring dollies. And so we'll bring two of each, and we'll bring a ton of banana boxes. The farms do not have excess boxes that they can just give you. If you're short a box, you're not going to be able to pick up produce, is one thing I've learned. So bring as many boxes as you can. If you come back with some empty, that's totally fine, but not having enough is definitely something we've experienced and unfortunate for us and the vendors. So we bring a ton of boxes. We bring our thank you donation slips for tax purposes that Joey mentioned. And then we bring a bunch of Sharpies as well. So what we do is we meet 15, 20 minutes before the market closes. We create a game plan about how we're going to split up the market between staff and volunteers, who's going to take what side. And then we load our carts up with a bunch of empty boxes, the thank you notes and Sharpies. And we just go from vendor to vendor. And at this point, all the vendors know us. They see the banana boxes and they know who we are and what we're coming for. And we just ask them, do you think you'll have extra produce at the end of the day today? And most of the vendors will, and they'll request a specific number of boxes. And we'll leave them those boxes, and then we'll just continue throughout the market. And we find it usually takes 15 to 30 minutes after the market has closed that the vendors are able to fill up the banana boxes with the extra produce. So we just kind of hang out, enjoy being out in the weather for a bit, and then check in with the farmers, in that 20-minute range to see if they've finished packing things up. Because one thing to consider is that when the market is ending, the vendors are super busy. They have a lot of stuff to break down. They have money to count. They're loading up their vans. So we're not, we want to give them their space and not pressure them, make them any more, stressed out than they need to be. So we just patiently wait and let them do their thing. So then we'll collect all the boxes, and actually, I think we can go to the next slide. We'll collect all the boxes. We'll load them back up into our food bank van. I should also mention that sometimes we come in just a standard like family van, not a box truck. And I would say that's the smallest size vehicle that you could probably do gleaning in. So if you don't have access to, a proper van, if somebody has, a minivan, that totally works too. So anyways, we'll load up everything into the van. We'll take a volunteer or two back with us to the food bank since it's so close, which is nice. And when we get back to the food bank, we unload everything. And one thing I realized I forgot to mention, the Sharpies. The reason we bring those is all of the boxes that we give to the vendors, we label that box with a Sharpie with the name of the farm. So that way, when we come back, we know who donated what to us. So when we bring everything back, we weigh all of the boxes and just record on a paper sheet the poundage from each farm that we got for the day. So that's a really just like simple, low-tech way for us to keep track of who donated what. So we'll track all that down. We'll store everything into the fridge. And I think for us, this brings up one of the biggest considerations for us to make is for us, and I think for anybody, is the distribution plan. So now we have everything back, at our food bank. But it's the other end of things, is getting the food out is, I think, actually one of the biggest challenges for us. A couple of reasons for that is, one, a lot of that produce has been sitting out in a very hot weather in the sun all day, and it needs to be distributed very quickly. So it's really fortunate in our situation, we glean on a Sunday, and Monday morning, we do major home delivery out to homebound clients the next morning. And so our distribution plan is that most of our food that we get from the farmers market is going out that next morning. And the other consideration to make in that is equity. We're getting, in many cases, like really valuable niche products, but not always in the highest quantity. And if we did it on a regular distribution line, we know that only the first few people in line might be able to get a basket of strawberries, and that doesn't feel fair for us. So home delivery has been a really good method for us to distribute these items where it really wouldn't make sense for us to put it out on the food bank line. Sometimes we will come back with like 200 pounds of zucchini. We can definitely give that out to everybody shopping that day, and that would be fine. But I really think that's a major consideration for folks to make is how can you equitably distribute food if you're getting it in smaller quantities than you're used to. I know I'm running out of time here. So just really quickly, the benefits, talked very quickly about, considerations and challenges. But benefits is our clients love what we get. And we're getting access to produce, quality of produce that we would otherwise not be able to afford. And we definitely hear that response from the clients who do get items from the farmers market. They look forward to the summer just as much as I do because of the quality items they're getting. We have some clients who are on very restricted diets and need to eat organic food. And I'm always hearing from them about how much they appreciate that JFS is able to provide that. And a big reason why is because we have this gleaning program. And really quickly, at the end of the year, we total up the poundage from each farm and we send thank you notes to all of the farms who donated to us throughout the year. And, we have so much appreciation for all the farms and the farmers who are willing to share this with us. Joey's team at Neighborhood Farmers Markets does so much of the coordinating piece for us that makes it so easy. So we're really lucky that we get to be on autopilot because of them, everything that Joey just shared. So we have a great appreciation for them. And then we also really appreciate having our volunteers who show up for this. So yeah, made it really quick at the end there. Sorry about that. So I'm super happy to, talk in more detail if anybody has specific questions of things that I just like brushed right over. But that is a really quick overview of how we do gleaning at JFS.
Sorry, Brian, I feel like I took up so much of your time.
No, you had so much to share. Thank you.
These are our emails. And then I also had one more thing that I remembered as Brian was talking. Our markets, we always have extra carts that our gleaners can borrow because we know sometimes they're coming up in a minivan and they don't have room to bring a cart. And I'm not going to speak for all farmers markets, but it's a farmers market. So I'm like 85% sure everyone will have a cart that you'll be able to borrow. But that is something you could also check ahead of time with the market. I'm going to stop share. Questions?
I just wanted to go ahead and open the floor up to questions to you guys. Thank you all, Joey and Brian, so much for that information. That was chock full of really great information. And sorry about the short time frame getting started late and such, but in the time we have left, please, if anybody has any questions for these guys while we have them here, feel free to go ahead and ask.
Hey, Brian, I have a question. I'm Sean with the Association of Gleaning Organizations. I'm curious, you stated at the beginning that you guys have to have a staff present at all your market gleans. And I guess maybe this is a question for both of you, but specifically for Brian, what were the reasons why you guys have that need? And then I'm curious, Joey, if you see that with your other partners, how many of them send staff and how many of them just send volunteers?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And that's something I did actually want to build upon a little bit. That's really well, as far as I know, specific to us. Actually, our lives would be a lot easier if we didn't have to have staff there. And I would recommend for anybody who has that flexibility to just rely on volunteers. The reason we need staff is not so much for on the farmers market end of things. It's on the backside of getting into the building. We're in a pretty high security building here, and so volunteers don't have access without staff. So if anybody has the flexibility to not require staff to go to the market, like I said, it's a huge challenge with a small team to go on a weekend for us to coordinate that staff wise. That flexibility would go a long ways.
Yeah, and we have a lot of gleaners who only send volunteers out to the markets. Sometimes they'll have a volunteer that's been a long time volunteer, so they'll have a key to the building to get to the refrigeration section. Or sometimes they'll have a staff person or a board member kind of wait for them to come back to the food banks to open it up for them. But we do have a lot of gleaning programs that are just volunteers gleaning.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to share another similar, Brian. We struggle with the distribution of the produce quickly after the farmers market. And we have a community fridge at our food pantry. So a lot of the gleaned produce ends up from the farmers market ends up going in there just so that folks can take it quickly. So if other people have community fridges, that's another option.
That's very cool.
I have a quick question for both of you guys. Like, how do y'all address any like liability concerns related to gleaning activities, or have you had any issues with that?
For us, we don't have many. I think Washington has the I'm gonna totally butcher it, the Samaritan Good Food Donation Law, something along those lines. So a lot of our vendors are covered and we don't really worry about that. And we trust that our vendors are bringing quality produce to the market. So they're gonna be handing off quality produce, albeit a little wilted in the sun. And really, I think this came up with like parking and cars, but we don't really require insurance for gleaners because they are normally able to find a parking spot outside of the market. And in the case where we do bring them into the market, we have a very specific corner that they're allowed to bring their car in. So we haven't had any liability issues or concerns.
And I think from our end, the only liability that we're considering is volunteers, which we already have integrated into all of our volunteer programs where people are signing waivers for that.
Yeah. And as Brian and I were preparing for this presentation, we unearthed a 14-year-old document that Jewish Family Services actually put together about gleaning at Seattle farmers markets. Some of the information is slightly dated, but it's still a wealth of information, and we shared that with Sarah to share out.
I'll drop those links in the
Yeah, I did not, that predated my time. I did not write this, but it has a wealth of information and goes much more in detail than I did in my presentation.
Brian, this may be before your time as well, but I'm just curious uh, how you've seen the gleaning program change at your markets over the 15 years. That's a tremendous amount of time to sort of adapt and learn. I'm wondering if there's any changes that you're aware of that really stand out to you or anything like that.
Yeah, in my time, I mean, actually, the biggest change that we've experienced is so specific to us, but the Capitol Hill market actually changed locations. And so that's been the biggest thing that we've adapted to. Fortunately for us, it's been a positive change. The market got bigger, the parking situation got better for us. But in terms of like beyond that specific change in my period of time, I really haven't seen anything that really stands out or like too significant. Yeah, I mean, we did go through the challenge of like pandemic times, where everything changed. Fortunately, markets did stay open during, the beginning of the pandemic. But yeah, our donations have actually been pretty static throughout the years. We haven't seen like huge fluctuations in amounts. A lot of the vendors at the market are really consistent, which is awesome. Like some of these vendors, I think we have been gleaning from for 15 years, which is amazing. It's been quite stable for us. And I think that just kind of speaks to the strength probably of the farmers market and the way it's run.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question. Hopefully, I'm not monopolizing the questions here. But Joey, I'm just curious if you ever had a gleaning situation not work out in one of your markets and why that didn't work out. I just, obviously we're not looking for names or anything, but I'm just trying to understand what didn't work is, I think, a good learning for all of us.
Yeah. Normally when we bring in a gleaning partner, we kind of hope to go into that agreement that they'll stay on for year after year after year and kind of stay on for 15 years like Jewish Family Services. And oftentimes when we do have a gleaning situation not work out, it's really that the gleaning partner has just, staffing capacity constraints, they can't recruit enough volunteers, or that long time really dedicated volunteer they had retired or moved away, and they just aren't able to keep up that gleaning that they were able to do before, and they're a little bit more inconsistent. And oftentimes it's a very mutual, just like, hey, like we don't have the staff to be able to keep doing this, and then we'll recruit a different gleaning organization. As far as I'm aware, there's never been like any incident where it's been really bad. I think sometimes if a gleaning org is like super inconsistent, that's something we'll talk to them about, but that's often just having a hard time recruiting volunteers or finding that staff time. And sometimes we'll try to work with them and see if every other week schedule would be more feasible for what they have, kind of like what we're doing in Capitol Hill. Sometimes the organization is just moving and they're further away from the market, and it doesn't make sense for them to glean from there anymore, and the times for other markets just doesn't work out. So it's normally just a logistical volunteer capacity issue, which causes us to look for new gleaners.
When you have people like Capitol Hill who are gleaning every other week, does someone else glean the off week? That's great. I was going to ask how that every other week schedule worked with your vendors, remembering what week was happening, but it sounds like that's not necessarily the issue. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I understand, I think our organization that we share with that comes on their off weeks, this relationship has existed for a really long time, which is awesome that we've been able to do that. And then one thing I was going to speak to with volunteers, we were just talking about consistency. In our experience, because it's off hours, not during regular business hours, it's a great opportunity for recruiting volunteers for people who are concerned about that. I mean, this is kind of a rare opportunity to show up on a weekend or to show up in the evening when like you're not working. And it's a really fun opportunity. I think people are excited to go to the markets. So that's been like a really positive side. I think on the negative side, this is probably the volunteer opportunity that people show up to the least consistently for us. For whatever reason, maybe it's because it's only once or twice a month for the volunteer, or because it's on the weekend and they get distracted. Recruiting has been so easy, but getting people to actually show up has been really challenging. So just putting that out there.
Do you try to over recruit to compensate for that?
That's what we're thinking about experimenting with this year. I think this year has actually been the hardest for us at getting people to show up for whatever reason. So we were just talking about the over recruiting and seeing if we want to experiment with that. Yeah, I think another consideration for us, it's such a quick thing. I mean, we show up 20 minutes before the market and everything's collected 20 minutes after. The whole thing for a volunteer easily could last less than an hour. And so it's just something to be very upfront with volunteers of like, it's a really quick commitment. If you're going to be commuting to this, you might spend more time commuting than actually doing the volunteer gig. So we just want to be really careful about how we, advertise it to people, and that, yeah, we don't have like 10 people show up and there's not work for 10 people.
We just have like a couple of minutes left, so I definitely encourage anyone who has any questions to reach out, or I did drop the emails into the chat, and I believe she showed them on the slide earlier. But I'm also happy to continue the conversation as long as anyone wants to. I feel like it'd be really interesting to talk about potential incentives for gleaning and farmers markets and how that might work. And I just wondered if you guys had any experience with that, or if you've heard of anybody doing anything incentive-wise for gleaners.
Hey, Sarah, I think just as a suggestion, Rachel put into the chat something that Upper Valley Mend has been doing with their growers, which I think both Brian and Joey saw. That is, I think, a really great idea. I don't know if Rachel, do you want to talk about that for a second?
Are you talking about the purchasing?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, so we've been gleaning at farmers markets for a while as well. In the last couple of years, there have been new farmers at our farmers market because our market is trying to expand the offerings, which is great. So in our introductions with these folks. We do say, hey, you know, we're the Gleaners. We come at the end of the market. If you have anything to donate, you're not going to take back. Also, we have funds to purchase from farmers to support you. And so I think when they hear that, they get excited.
Yeah.
And then they're willing to donate, and then we make a plan to purchase from them, and they bring that produce the next time they're at the farmers market, and we pick it up from them. So yeah, just in a relationship building idea. Yep.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really like that symbiotic sense and nature of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thanks for sharing that. And to bring it all like very full circle, we're able to do that to an extent because of funds that we get from Harvest Against Hunger. So, you know, bringing it all, and, you know, Joey's org helps coordinate some of that for us as well. So bring it all a little full circle there.
That's awesome, Rachel. I love that idea. Time to send an email out to my Gleaners. Hey.
Awesome. Well, we're right at time, so I want to respect everyone's time. Thank you guys all so much for coming and chatting with us. I'm sorry about the snafu with the technology and stuff. And yeah, I thank you guys so much for coming. It's been really full of information, and I can't wait to share this with everybody as well as recording. So yeah, awesome. Thank you guys. Have a great weekend and stay cool.
Thanks for putting that together, Sarah. Great job.
Thank you for
Thank
coordinating
you
with
guys
Sarah.
for joining.
Bye, guys.
Bye.